Okay, Chair Carlton, as I said, Warden Hicks will be late arriving, and Councillor Woodbury has not joined us as of yet, but I will let you know when he does. And the meeting is now yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'll call the meeting to order now. If there's any declaration of interest, it can be declared at any time. And item 3, the draft climate change action plan. I need a mover to put it on the floor, please. Councillor McQueen, seconder, Councillor Hutchison. And I think we're turning this over to Scott to proceed with.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Carlton and members of the task force. So I've got a brief presentation that I'm going to walk you through. And I will be doing some of the presentation, but certainly invite Randy or Kim to jump in at any point if there's details I'm missing or items they'd like to further elaborate on. So just before I get started, can everybody see my screen there now? Yeah, okay, great. Alrighty, so thank you for your time here this morning. The presentation today will be a little bit of a recap for members of the task force. It's been a little bit since we spoke on this, but I'm also aware that there's a number of people that will be tuning in and watching the video from today after the fact. We've had a number of emails and calls from different members of the public and people that sit on local municipal climate action teams that are very interested in the county's climate action plan in this regard, and had specifically noted that they wanted to watch the meeting today. So I have prepared a little bit of a longer presentation just to provide some of that recap and background for somebody that might not be as familiar as our task force members are. So I apologize for the duplication in this regard. So I wanted to start just by going over the vision of the Climate Change Action Plan. And as the task force will remember, this vision statement was developed collaboratively with input from members of County Council, but also with input from the community and members of staff. And what it really boils down to is the county wants to take leadership here. The Climate Change Action Plan ultimately will be a plan that looks at both corporate and community strategies. And we believe that the only way we're going to have success in the community is that we can demonstrate at a corporate level that we're showing leadership and demonstrating a path forward in there. And when I say we, I refer to the county, but also our 9 member municipalities. And we do want to work very collaboratively with them on the finalization of this plan, but ultimately the implementation of the plan. It's something that no one party can take on their own. And we fully believe that we've got a lot of interested community stakeholders as well as our municipalities, which should help make this plan a success in that regard. Oops. So as you may recall, we are going through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and ICLEI's Partners for Climate Protection program. It is a 5-milestone process whereby the first 3 milestones are captured by the background data and the completion of the plan. And so if we are able to pass a climate change action plan maybe later this year, then we'll have completed milestone 3. And then milestone 4 is the actual implementation of the plan, followed by ongoing monitoring and progress reports on the plan. As you know, this plan will be a very long-term plan, and it's setting targets out to the year 2050. So it's going to take a lot of monitoring and also adjustments over time as technology and other factors change. We are targeting completion of this plan by late fall of 2021, dependent on how the public and community stakeholder consultation goes throughout the summer and early fall in this regard, and of course dependent on the task force feedback and whether or not you accept the draft plan here today. So some of the project objectives with respect to the Climate Change Action Plan come down to understanding what our current greenhouse gas emissions are, again, both at the county corporate level, but also on a broader scale across our community. The plan will seek to develop reduction targets, both in the short term. So we've got one target that takes us to the year 2030, and as well as in the long term, we have another target that takes us to the year 2050. And in order to achieve those targets, both the short and long-term targets, we've identified a number of strategies for the corporate and community emissions in that regard. And as I've noted, we want to partner with various stakeholders, whether it be from the agricultural community or whether it be some of our utility providers, as well as our municipalities and conservation authorities and anyone else really willing to partner with us in that regard. There has been a significant amount of engagement done on this plan so far. And although the engagement maybe didn't look the way we thought it would when we first started the plan in 2019, we have been fairly successful in hearing from a number of parties. We've been working closely with conservation authorities, with the Grey Goose Public Health Unit. We've had meetings and discussions with municipal CAOs, as well as various municipal staff from different departments. We've had some input from Bruce County as well. One of the largest contributors and the drivers really have been the local municipal climate action team groups. And they're a wonderful assortment of organizations. Some are purely community driven and some at your municipal tables have council representation on them. But they're all very enthusiastic and very eager to share data and share success stories and everything else. And so there is a group that meets on a monthly basis with representation from each of these climate action groups. And it really is a great opportunity to share resources and gather feedback on our draft objectives in this regard. We've had a number of Zoom and online meetings, but we've also had some successful surveys in this regard. The task force may recall that we had one general survey as well as another survey that was targeted more specifically to the agricultural community. We've been working with staff from our economic development and tourism team to reach out to businesses, large and small, as well as tourism operators in that regard. We've had pointed consultation with various groups from the agricultural sector. Gray Agricultural Services has been a huge help in getting out to some of these communities. We've also brought some updates, and we look to seek further feedback from the county's own Agricultural Advisory Committee in this regard. We've been engaging with the Council on Aging. We've been engaging with various departments from across the county, and we've also had good feedback and data sharing from some of our utility companies, which you'll see in the draft plan. There's some energy maps, and they're primarily generated from the information that was shared from folks like Enbridge and Hydro One in that regard. Oops, sorry. So as we've talked about, there are two types of greenhouse gas inventories. The first is the community inventory, and this is done on a very broad level. And as I noted on the previous slide, using numbers from the utility companies and energy data in that regard, consumption data in that regard. And then we have our own corporate emissions in that regard. And as you'll see through the coming strategies, the two certainly aren't mutually exclusive. And there's opportunities for us to raise awareness and education programs and also look at policy changes that will impact both our corporate and community strategies. Although the strategies are broken down into two separate groups in the report, starting at page 40 of the draft Climate Change Action Plan, where you have the community strategies followed by the corporate strategies later on in the document. Just as a brief recap, we did, because we started this project in 2019, we set 2018 as our baseline data year for looking at establishing what energy consumption was at the corporate and community levels. In the end, this, although we didn't know it at the time, turned out to be a very interesting decision because, of course, it reflects a full year under non-pandemic conditions. And we just worry that had we picked 2020 or even 2021, there would have been some skews in the data one way or the other based on provincial lockdowns or shutdowns in that regard. So 2018, although it's not as up to date now as maybe it was when we first picked it in 2019, does represent a good baseline upon which we can build. And so with respect to our corporate emissions in this regard, you can see that by far the largest amount of the county's energy consumption, and this should be no surprise, is our buildings, whether it be our administration buildings or our transportation buildings or the many number of county-owned housing units in that regard. Certainly we have a significant amount of energy consumption there. That's followed by our fleet. And of course, we have our paramedic services, ambulances, and we have our transportation vehicles, as well as the social services vans in that regard, and followed way behind those by our streetlights. And what you can see between the energy consumption versus the emissions is, although the streetlights might be 6% of the consumption, they're actually only 1% of the emissions, and they're fairly green in that regard, if you will. And so the percentages between the consumption and the emissions do change just slightly there. As you'll see, the fleet is represented by a higher proportion, and the buildings fall off just slightly there. When we look at the community energy and emissions by subsector, you can see obviously a greater range of sectors in that regard. It's notable that agriculture is a large portion there at 44%. We see this as a great opportunity to work with our agricultural community, and in fact, our consultant has noted that most people or most municipalities, when preparing a climate change action plan, don't include agriculture in their climate action planning. From a county staff perspective, we just believe that because it's such a significant sector in the county, and an important economic driver in the county, also important land stewards, we needed to factor in agriculture. So we're very excited to work with our friends in the agricultural community in that regard. You'll see private vehicles are the next largest in terms of energy consumption in that regard, followed by residential buildings and commercial buildings, and sort of all the way down the list. It's noted that they do have a separate category for private vehicles versus off-road vehicles in this regard. And perhaps I should have noted at the beginning of the presentation, if it suits the task force and you, Chair Carleton, I'm happy to take questions throughout. So if anybody has any questions, they can put their hand up and direct them through the chair in that regard. With respect to looking at setting emissions targets, as I said, we're looking at the two targets for the short term and the long term, as well as for the community and the corporate emissions in that regard. And staff have had many discussions with the consultant on this regard in terms of what the level of the target should be. And the consultant has outlined to us that the targets should be ambitious in this regard. They certainly shouldn't be targets that you would reach anyway, simply through technological changes, if you weren't taking concentrated action in this regard. But at the same point, we don't want to set targets that are so ambitious that it'll be very difficult to meet. So we have tried to kind of find that balance between an ambitious target in that regard, as well as something that can actually be achieved in the short and longer term in that sense. And so in 2 slides time, you will see what the targets we've set or proposed are, and we're certainly looking for feedback from the task force and the community on that. But before moving on to that, we wanted to just show you some other sample targets from different municipalities that the consultant has shared with us. Some of them, like Kawartha Lakes, only included a corporate target, and others included both a corporate and community target in this regard. I will also note that I was on a consultation meeting a few weeks back with a number of other larger municipalities, including the City of London and Region of Waterloo and others in that regard. And some of them have much more ambitious targets, and some communities are even looking at going completely net zero by 2040 or 2050. At the bottom of the slide there, you will see the federal targets as well as the IPCC targets in that regard, just to further frame where we're looking at with our own county targets. With respect to the proposed county targets, we are looking at reducing 20% beyond the baseline levels of 2018 by the year 2030, and then 60% below the 2018 baseline by 2050. The community targets are just slightly less ambitious at 15% and 50% respectively. But certainly this is one area that we'd love the task force feedback on, either now or after you see the strategies. So with respect to the strategies, in the community strategies, there were the seven different theme areas that the consultant had identified. So we'll bring you some of those strategies for each of the above themes there. Specifically with respect to buildings, there's 5 strategies here that we've looked at. Strategies 1 and 2 are both looking at energy efficiency retrofits, and strategy 1 will focus, of course, on residential buildings, and strategy 2 will focus on commercial, institutional, and industrial buildings, or commercial and institutional buildings, and strategy 4 gets into the industrial. With respect to these strategies, it's a mixture. One, we hope to rely on some educational tools in that regard, but then two, we'd also hope to look to some incentives, and these incentives may come through provincial or federal programs. They could also come through rebates or programs through utility providers. Or they might also come through municipal and county programs that could be offered through the community improvement plans across the county. One of the other strategies we're looking at through strategy 3 would be to develop a county-wide green standard for new buildings. And so this would be sort of a partner document to the Ontario Building Code, which might look to prioritize green building in this regard. And there's a number of other examples across the province, notably Halton Hills has a very good example that we could borrow from in that regard. So we certainly wouldn't be creating something from scratch here. In speaking with the municipal CAOs in this regard, they noted the importance of the county showing leadership here and making sure we, as much as possible, between the county and our member municipalities and our chief building officials in that regard, work to come up with something that's countywide, so that if you have a developer or a resident building in town of Blue Mountains, they're being treated the same way that you'd be treated in Chatsworth or Owen Sound in that regard. This. And so this really would be a carrot type approach rather than a stick, whereby there could be prioritization or there could be incentives for those that meet a certain threshold of green building in that regard. And then finally, strategy number 5 would be that energy efficiency education and awareness program. And certainly what I found in my own life is there's savings to be had that can be done in a very cheap manner, just based on what you know. And the more we can promote energy efficiency education, the better it should be for all of us in that regard. With respect to some of the community strategies, one of the key points is we want to look more towards low carbon vehicles and right now electric vehicle adoption. And you'll see this later on in the presentation through an initiative that we heard about at our last task force meeting. But we want to do everything we can to make sure that residents in our community and businesses in our community would feel comfortable in updating their vehicles to electric vehicles. This might also include looking at an electric vehicle car share program. There was an example provided by the consultant from a municipality in Quebec in this regard that had utilized some of their municipal vehicles off hours for an electric vehicle car share program. With respect to the strategy that's in the draft climate change action plan, we've broadened that out to suggest that it doesn't necessarily need to be a county or municipal car share program, but it might be owned or operated by a social enterprise or private business in that regard. That would give those the opportunity that wanted to share a vehicle, the ability to share an electric vehicle in that regard. Some of the other strategies in this community section also revolve around active transportation. And certainly both the county and our member municipalities are already investing a lot in active transportation promotion and upgrading our infrastructure through paved shoulders and bike lanes and sidewalks and trails to better promote and allow for active transportation in that regard. And then, of course, there's also the Grey Transit route and the ongoing initiatives by the county and by the City of Owen Sound and Southgate and others that are looking at offering ride sharing and on-demand transit programs across the county, even into our rural areas. With respect to some of the community waste strategies, obviously, the county doesn't have a direct role at this stage in waste management, but we do want to partner with our member municipalities to support waste diversion efforts in that regard. This has been flagged by the consultant as one of the key areas, and certainly in the public feedback we've heard on the plan, there's a lot of interest in this, and there's been a lot of interest in whether or not there could be a further expansion of organics pickup across the county as well, rather than just a few municipalities. We also want to support the ability to reuse building materials, and it's been raised a few times at this task force in the past that sometimes you can see somebody buying a 5-year-old house and completely gutting or retrofitting the kitchens or the bathrooms. So do we have a place where those sinks and tubs and toilets and other materials can go? And there are some reuse it centers across the county, and we'd like to further support the ability to reuse some of those materials. There's the adage that the greenest house is the one that's already built. And so the more we can support that, I think the better in that regard. We also want to work with our member municipalities to support wastewater efficiency in their own operation of their wastewater treatment plants in that regard, and support further education and awareness on both waste reduction and wastewater efficiency in that regard. With respect to agriculture, there's a number of initiatives here, and I would note that a number of these initiatives are already underway by our various farm commodity groups and by folks like Great Agricultural Services, who have a tremendous number of training programs every year, aside from Farmers Week, which is in January of every year. Some of the things that we wanted to look at in this strategy is looking at overall climate adaptation plans. So as the task force may remember, the county's climate change action plan will be a mitigation strategy, but we also want to look at, as we move further into the future, what does adaptation look like? And we've already had some municipalities like the City of Owen Sound showing leadership there and completing climate adaptation plans. And I believe it's on the radar of a few other municipalities here locally. So although this is under the agricultural strategy, it really goes far beyond agriculture in that regard and adaptation in a broader sense. We also want to look at energy efficiency retrofits for farm buildings and across the agricultural sectors in that regard. Just as we talked about with residential and institutional and commercial buildings, there's some savings to be had here, so to speak. We want to work to continue to promote locally grown food, and certainly our economic development team and Philly Markowitz have been ahead of the curve on this one and are the envy of other municipalities across different parts of the province in that regard. And strategy 18 is really to facilitate that capacity building. And the county doesn't want to get in the way of the excellent work that's already being done out there, but we do want to support those agricultural groups and the groups like Great Agricultural Services and help contribute towards their educational programs to add to the knowledge base that's already out there in this regard. With respect to the land use strategies, maybe this is something that I'm most familiar with. We certainly want to look at further updates to our official plan and our member municipal official plans and zoning bylaws as we move forward to make sure that we're really promoting the type of development that will be both green, but also accessible for all. And one of the things in promoting compact and mixed use developments is it may help achieve some of the other county objectives in this regard, and notably the affordable and attainable housing gap that is across the county at the moment. By working to promote and reuse a little better, it may aid in some of those other objectives. We also want to continue on with some of the strategies that we already have around the protection of significant natural heritage features, including our water courses, and making sure that we're allowing for those natural functions to continue, but also adapt over time as our climate's changing in that regard. We also want to look at energy strategies. And this will come up again in the corporate strategies, but we will want to look at updates to our planning documents with respect to renewable energy. It used to be that we didn't need such policies in the official plans because of the Green Energy Act, but since the repeal of that legislation, we do need to think more about what types of renewable energy are appropriate and what the policies are in that regard. Certainly, the consultants saw a lot of opportunity for promoting different types of renewable energy, including rooftop solar on both public buildings as well as private community buildings as a means by lowering our footprint in that regard. This is one that, again, isn't typically in climate action plans. It's typically more so in the adaptation strategies. But we did also want to include strategies for protecting our shorelines, whether it be Georgian Bay or whether it be a number of our inland lakes or major water courses throughout the county, to A, protect the natural function of those features, but B, also to reduce the risk of future flooding or harm to property in that regard. And so certainly in this regard, we see the conservation authorities as one of the key partners in undertaking these exercises. There's also a number of stewardship groups across the county that we think would be valuable partners in this regard. So some of it comes down to mapping. So we'd look at making sure our current hazard lands and environmental protection mapping is sufficient and accurately reflects what we think the risk will be. And others come down to monitoring. And I would note that again, our conservation authorities are already doing a lot of this work. So we're certainly not looking to reinvent the wheel here, but looking for ways that we can support in this regard, because we do believe it's a valuable community strategy. With respect to the corporate strategies, we have four main themes in that regard: stationary energy, waste, municipal culture, and our vehicles, fleets, and equipment in that regard. So in the corporate strategies, again, a number of these we've already made great headway on and we're already underway even prior to the Climate Change Action Plan. But a number of the strategies relate back to energy efficiency. So that might be things like switching over to the conversion of LED lighting, whether it be indoors or outdoors, or it might be looking at energy efficiency retrofits. Or if we're looking at building new buildings, what standards do we build to in that regard? We've also talked about looking at, similar to the community themes, strategies for renewable energy on county or municipal properties. Are there either new builds or existing builds where we could look at adding some solar in that regard to, again, help reduce our footprint? We also talked about whether or not there's the ability for the county or municipalities to look at some demonstration sites in this regard. And so we've had questions in the past from developers or members of the public. Hey, if I was looking to build a green home, what would that look like? Or if I was looking to get in touch with a contractor who specializes in this, who would I call in that regard? So we thought if there was the opportunity to showcase some of this technology at county or municipal level, that could be very beneficial in terms of showing people how it could be done and what it might look like in that regard. And obviously, we do have some buildings across the county that were built to varying green standards, including the public health unit building in Owen Sound and the Town of Blue Mountains Town Hall in Thornbury there, that we can point to as some early leaders in that regard as well. We want to look at our vehicles and fleets in this regard. We want to, we've talked about in the past whether or not there's the opportunity to look at the electrification of some of our vehicles, and certainly as technology changes, that appears to be getting more feasible. And we'd work with staff in the various departments as well as our purchasing staff to look at what that would entail in that regard. We also want to look at the maintenance operations of our fleet in this respect, as well as promoting the ability, and maybe this is a post-COVID one, to look at additional car sharing and commuting and trying to limit the number of times that we're encouraging single occupant vehicle use and commuting in that regard. Oops. With respect to waste, obviously, we want to look at the waste being generated corporately, and one of the maybe positive impacts of the pandemic is that at least at the county level, and I believe at a number of your own municipal tables, we have been able to go significantly more paperless, and we have made a number of changes to our own operations that has cut down on the waste we generate within our operations in that regard. Certainly, there's still improvements that can be made, and we look forward to working across the county and the municipalities in this regard to look at what can be done in that regard. Another, again, just comes down to the education and awareness, and that's both at a corporate level and amongst our own staff. And just working together to share resources and share understandings in that regard. And that leads into the sort of municipal culture. And one of the one of the recommendations there is that we promote a culture of conservation. And we've talked about at the county level, could we look at say, composters in some of our county facilities? And so, if we have leftover food from meetings or staff lunches or anything else, make sure that's not going into our landfills in that regard. And if there is the ability for on-site composting, or maybe even at some of our housing units, we should look to do that. We're also looking to be strategic in our decision making at the county and municipal levels to start viewing things through more of our climate lens. And this will be looked at both the land use planning levels. And so I know for some of you that have already started your official plan updates, this is a comment that's come up amongst some of the public feedback, but then also at our corporate levels. And again, similar to the discussion on the fleets, when we're looking at our own purchasing in that regard, what does it look like to apply a climate lens to some of those decisions? And then strategy 13, and we had a report at the last task force meeting on this, was that we appoint a county staff person that could lead climate change initiatives in this regard. And Randy will have some further news on that later in the presentation here. And this all leads us to some potential program areas. And we see a lot of opportunity throughout these strategies at the community and corporate level, but we know that they won't all be done day one. This is a long-term plan. There are a lot of strategies in this regard. And so it will come down to prioritizing some of these strategies, some getting going on right away. And there's some that will certainly be some quick wins. And there's others that will be refined and developed over time. That climate lens is one we think would be good to get going on right away, and certainly working with our partners at municipalities and conservation authorities and others to look at what that looks like in terms of a decision-making framework. We also want to work on some of the municipal awareness and education programs. We want to explore opportunities for local renewable energy generation. As I noted, that's both looking at our own operations, but also looking at the policy basis in that regard. And I know some municipalities are already looking at that as part of their own official plan updates in this regard. This is something that municipalities and counties do anyway, but we want to continue to look for energy efficiency opportunities in our municipal buildings. And again, these are both the existing municipal buildings and any new operations that we might be looking at building in that regard. Our transportation department has been leading the way in partnership with folks from our tourism department on designing roadways that are safe and accessible for all users. And certainly we'd look to pull from the recommendations of the Cycling and Trails master plan to further look at options in this regard. We want to continue to work with municipalities and folks like Stephanie Stewart on transit across the county, and how will that evolve over time with different funding opportunities, but also with different technologies coming in. As I said, we want to further look at low carbon vehicles and potentially more electric vehicles in our fleets and across our communities. We've talked about the diversion of waste from landfills. We're also undergoing a review of the county's forest management bylaw right now. We know some of our municipalities are also looking at their own tree bylaws at a local level, like Town of the Blue Mountains. So what does this look like if we're viewing some of this decision-making through a climate lens? And then further, we'd like to partner, like I said, with our conservation authorities and municipalities to strengthen the mapping around the natural heritage and hazard in this regard. And so with this, I have talked a long time and I apologize. I'll turn it over to Randy now for some exciting updates on this slide here.
Great. Thanks, Scott. And good morning, everyone. So as Scott noted, there are a number of strategies that feed into projects that are already being worked on by the county and local municipalities. These include things like converting our streetlights to LEDs, improving active transportation infrastructure, as Scott noted, as well as looking at policy updates in our official plans. Another thing that Scott noted was the hiring of a staff person to help us move forward with finalizing the action plan and to start implementing the action plan in partnership with local municipalities, as well as other key stakeholders, including the community at large. We will be making a formal announcement of who we've hired at council on July 8th. So we're excited that we have hired a person. We're just kind of dotting the I's, cross the T's, and we'll be able to make a formal announcement on July 8th. We see the role of this staff person as being a resource for the county as well as the local municipalities. Because as Scott noted earlier, it'll be key for the county and local municipalities working together on implementing the action plan, especially when it comes to the community strategies and actions in order to reach those proposed greenhouse gas reduction targets. And then another initiative that we've already talked about with this task force is, of course, is partnering with a number of other municipalities on a regional electric vehicle charging network feasibility study. It's a mouthful. And we are submitting a funding application to FCM in partnership with those municipalities. And we hope to be able to receive some funds to support this project. So that's just another initiative that we're already working on to move forward with the implementation of the action plan. Next slide there, Scott. In terms of next steps, of course, undertaking a broad public and stakeholder consultation that will occur throughout the summer and early fall of 2021. We'll, of course, post our climate change action plan on our website. We'll also have an executive summary, user-friendly version that we'll also be able to put some further information on to so that people won't necessarily have to read through the entire document if they choose to not to do that, but at least touching on some of the key highlights. And I think this presentation that Scott's outlined today really helps to frame some of those key points from the action plan. So we'll just build on that presentation, provide that as further information on our website, just so that people can truly understand and hopefully provide some further comments and feedback on whether or not we've hit the right mark with respect to the action plan. We will then, of course, work with our new climate change person and staff person, and we'll be getting their expertise and knowledge and input in terms of the action plan, as well as working on any revisions from the feedback that we received from local municipalities, the community, and then bring forward a final revised version to this task force for their consideration. And then, of course, then a final presentation to council. And then it's implementing the action plan and working with our local municipalities and others on terms of actually moving forward with trying to achieve those targets that we've identified. So, of course, we're happy to take any questions from the task force and any feedback in terms of, what you see in the action plan. Are we hitting the right mark with the targets? Are there some strategies or anything that's missing from the county's draft climate change action plan? So we posed some questions here for the task force consideration, in terms of whether or not how we can all work collectively to implement the strategies in the draft climate change action plan. As noted, we won't be able to do this on our own as a county. It's going to take a community-wide effort and working with our local municipalities to really move this forward. Another question is, are there any specific stakeholders or groups that the task force would like to see engaged that we haven't either already spoken of to earlier, or ones that we want to really target to make sure that we're hitting the right mark when it comes to the strategies and actions? And then whether the task force has any recommended engagement methods on what you would like to see on the draft climate change action plan, whether it's virtual meetings, surveys. Of course, there may be opportunities to engage directly, subject to public health restrictions, but if there's any feedback from the task force with respect to that. So we pose these questions, to the task force to see if, just to get some discussion hopefully flowing, and whether or not there's anything that, like I said, that you see missing within the draft climate change action plan before we hit the post button, so to speak, and start sharing this and having those discussions with the community. And then the recommendation is, of course, as noted earlier, is to receive obviously the draft action plan, and that staff be directed to start that public consultation process. And then once that consultation process has concluded, bringing back a final draft to the task force and council. So happy to take any questions and have a discussion about where we go from here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think it's an excellent report, and I think you've answered most of my questions. I see Councillor Gamble has his hand up, so go ahead, please, Brian.
Yes, Randy and Scott, very good presentation. You've covered a lot of aspects that do need to be covered. One thing that it may kind of be outside the scope of this, but I know in Chatsworth, we've been dealing with Enbridge Gas Company. We had the possibility of, coming right through the township, that we could have run a line to Williams Lake and Williamsford. Enbridge said they did the count. We are not convinced that they were right, but it would have been at the time, to put a station there would have been, the prime time to do it. Barring that, it'll be a long time down the road. And this is the kind of thing that, I don't know, the county has to get involved and force these companies to do stuff like this. This would be a huge, huge help to rural Ontario. We've got, in the farm community, we've got, tractors that can be converted to gas, natural gas, but dryers, that corn dryers, grain dryers, these things burn a huge amount of stuff and could really help the environment by the changeover to natural gas. But unless you have somebody that can apply the pressure to them, they just seem to they tell you the story, but it doesn't seem what we want to hear or should hear. Anyway, that's my statement.
Thank you, Brian. Does staff have any comments there?
Yeah, I think there's obviously on the energy strategies and actions, there's a number of things that we can work towards and work with our local municipalities and communities on, and looking at trying to coordinate efforts when it comes to things like if it's extension of natural gas, or looking at other options like solar and other things that would help to offset some of those energy costs. So and hopefully do that through programs and incentives and education. So that's something that could be considered as part of the overall, I guess, energy strategy, in terms of making sure that we're providing the proper utilities and resources to be able to move forward with our energy demands going forward. So it's something that could be considered as part of that overall energy strategy. And I don't know if Scott or Kim have anything further with respect to that.
It's the only thing further I'd add is it's a great point, Councillor Gamble, and the one other benefit that's come out of these this action plan process so far is that we've had to gently harass the utility companies for their data, but through doing so, we've actually built some relationships there. Maybe I shouldn't have used the word harass, but we built some relationships there to the point where Enbridge specifically had invited us to take part a few weeks ago in sort of a long-term planning and visiting session for where they see their company moving in the coming years. And so we've now got some further contacts at some of these utility companies that have noted they're very eager to work with us and explore what our challenges are, and look at programming going forward and service provisions. So, I certainly hear the frustration of the agricultural community that don't have access to that, but we're hopeful that we can work with these companies to look at future opportunity in that regard.
Thank you.
Kim, go ahead.
And I would just add that, some of these questions are bigger than all of us, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't care. Natural gas, on the one hand, can be a cleaner and greener alternative to other sources of fuel, as long as it's not fracked. Shale gas is way worse. And so that's the other piece, but I think there are other eyes on some of those sourcing questions. But just another thing to pay attention to about, where is it coming from? I think the bottom line is if we can be or help everyone to be as conscious and as efficient consumers of energy as we can, that's where we can all make a difference.
Thank you. I agree. I think it comes down to a lot of education to help people understand, even to explain to them what a green bin is, because most people haven't heard of that, to understand that they could have that in their own backyard. Are there any other questions from the rest of committee or comments? Kim, go ahead.
Just a question to the group. There's a lot of discussion right now about what appropriate targets are. And as staff, we've put forward something that we believe is achievable and a way to get the conversation started in the world. But there's a growing body of information suggesting that we need to be at 50% by 2030. And that would be a real fundamental change for a whole lot of people and places. So I just put that out there that, you know, we're looking at what, 15 or 20% by 2030. Is that going to be sufficient? And if every individual person and place doesn't make the effort to try to achieve a significant change, I don't know how we will all get there. So I just put that out there, and maybe it's something that will emerge through the consultations and the conversations that we have from this draft.
Thank you. Warden Hicks, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize again for joining in late. I got to tell you, I'm really excited to read this this action plan, and I missed the presentation, but I did read the entire report. I think that what we are demonstrating here, first, one of the interesting things that I read was the county is not actually required to have an action plan, but here we are playing a leadership role. And I really think that we ought to be telling people that, because really we're playing a leadership role and we're not required even to have an action plan. Secondly, that our corporate goals are higher than the community goals. So another way that we're showing that we're taking this thing very seriously, the consultation process, because I think a lot of questions like the one that Kim just raised are going to come up and get debated. And keep in mind that I suspect that, like anything else, it's a living, and we make the current climate, meaning the current environment. People are, maybe setting these type of targets. We then find out we need to up our game, and we can always do that. But I'm happy with the numbers that I see for right now, because they're not, way out there that you think, oh man, we'll never reach that. It looks attainable. And it suggests that we're going to perhaps, walk before we run, have some experience, get somewhere along the journey, and maybe make amendments, as we go. So I thought it was a terrific report, excellent work. I want to congratulate the staff, because it's a very good read and very comprehensive, and the way that we itemized who's been involved so far, anyways, was very, very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McQueen, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me there?
Yes.
Okay. Few things, and following up with the part that the CAO mentioned, a couple things. We in Canada are huge consumers of energy, because we live in a northern climate to start with. So we have to heat our homes, and that, now mind you, if you lived in the deep south, I guess you'd spend energy costs on keeping yourself cool versus warm. But So that's one thing we have to keep in mind. And the other part is Canada, Grey County, small municipalities are also very somewhat rural. So we need a vehicle, or we need some modes of transportation to get. So those are two vehicles, or what would you call it, mechanisms that we need to use energy. Certainly electrification is something that will take time, and hopefully there are opportunities through technology and funding for maybe not the large corporations to generate the energy, but also us as residents, and where we can, the whole saying used to be years back about conserving energy. We all conserve a little, we all conserve a lot. But if we can all generate a little, we all generate a lot. And I mean, with regards to small type of energy, whether it's solar on your home or a small wind turbine or whatever, whether you live near a water course or whatever, I think there's going to have to be a huge rethink about how we continue to generate electricity, because as we know, and as some of the professionals have said, is, the targets, I think, by both GM and Ford and other manufacturers of vehicles have said, they're looking at 2030, 35 to have all their manufactured vehicles as being electrical. Well, we have to do a huge change on our electrical grid in order to support every household having an electric vehicle in their driveway. Not saying it's not a bad thing. It's just, we all have to sort of start looking at how do we achieve this. And I strongly believe that we can. It's just going to take time and a rethink and all those things, because even in the agricultural side, and even as Councillor Gamble said about natural gas and that type of thing for the agricultural side, I know they are working on electrical type equipment and it's the same as the trucking industry. And I know Pat and I have talked, and there's been, I think, was it AMO in Ottawa, was it 2018, 17, where they talked about electric garbage trucks, and they're working on plows out in Edmonton and stuff like that. So they're working on that type of thing, but it's going to take a bit of time. And certainly, but the one thing about electrical vehicles is it's more expensive. And that's what probably those that were at that conference, found that those electrification or those electrified large vehicles were more money up front, but over the time of 10 years, it ended up being cheaper because your cost of maintenance was greatly reduced on that sense. And I think the warden and I have talked about that, or maybe he was part of that as well, or we've spoke about that maybe other meetings. So that part of, we live in a northern climate, we're very, somewhat rural, it's going to take time on those parts to get to that. But I think, if we all put our minds to it, I think we can change a lot. And that's the big part, is we just have to, but I think we have to start doing the little things, and certainly a good report. And, I look forward to the public feedback, but there has to be, as the CAO said, there has to be realistic parts of it as well. And it's going to take time to get to that, to get to those targets. Thank you. I don't know if that was a question or a speech or a statement. I'm not sure which.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, if I might?
Yes, please go ahead.
I think the infrastructure piece is going to be key. If I even examine just myself, I'm thinking my next vehicle, I want to make a commitment that it's going to be electric. But you always have that little worry, am I going to be able to get to Toronto and back, or am I going to be faced with a situation where I have to plan extra time because somewhere along the way I'm going to have to park and charge up. So I think people need to have confidence in that infrastructure. And I know that we are doing, and I hope staff will maybe speak to this, what we're doing with respect to partnering around a proposal for better infrastructure of electric vehicles. But I think the other part as well, and maybe the report does, I don't recall it speaking to this, is lobbying, I suppose, for incentives for homeowners. Because that's one of the things you have to consider. Well, I'm going to get this electric vehicle, but I probably also have to spend a bit of money to do some kind of an upgrade to have that power for my vehicle. What does that cost? Do I have to hire an electrician? Do I have to do an upgrade to my panel? So I think if people can have confidence in that infrastructure and perhaps some financial incentive to make that jump, it will make sense. And I would hope that the report would address that we would be doing our share to lobby for that better infrastructure and for the support for individuals who need to make an investment in their home.
Thank you. I can comment there from our Georgian Bluffs group. The infrastructure piece came up, as well as we mentioned asking that all new builds have the rough-in for electric vehicle wiring put into them, to put that right into our own building code, so to speak. I see, Scott, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Carlton, and great points, Warden Hicks and Deputy Warden McQueen. We actually had a meeting with the larger regional group that's applying for this electric vehicle feasibility funding. I can't remember the exact term, but it was interesting, some of the insights that have come out through some of the early surveys that they've done in terms of looking at electric vehicle charging stations in public locations. And what they found is that those public charging stations really do foster economic development, and they're largely used by people that are visiting your community, not necessarily people that are living in your community. And the thought is that people living in your community most often will choose to charge at home. So unlike our current gas-powered vehicles, you can just charge it. You can just, quote unquote, fill up at home. You don't need to plan a trip to the gas station, kind of thing. But it's the public stations that really foster sort of the tourists and the business visitors and everything else. And so the thinking is that, depending on the type of market you're going after, you would be strategic about where you locate them. And I know we've had some initial discussions, would we locate them on county and municipal facilities? But they said ideally you want to have them in a location where there's something for people to do. So if someone comes and they need a charge and it takes 2 hours to get a charge, what are they going to do for those 2 hours? So would you put one at, say, Grey Roots Museum, whereby you could go in and visit museum? Or would you put one, right in your downtown, whereby you could go and get a bite to eat or shop for 2 hours, kind of thing? And they've got some initial thoughts on, where would we look at them in terms of our downtowns and our public facilities, and where would we look at them for the traveling public? So if somebody's driving from the south up to the peninsula, along Highway 6 and 10 or 26, where would we need them for those more transitory public? But it is some really interesting insights that are just starting to come out there. And then with respect to the warden's comments about lobbying and trying to make sure we get incentives for home upgrades or electrical panel upgrades in that regard, I think that's a great comment. Certainly something we can take forward.
Thank you, Scott. Any other comments? Excellent report. Definitely a lot to take in there. One thing that struck me when I was reading it that kept kind of coming to mind, especially when I read the part about the locally grown food and all of that huge lawn in front of the county building, what could be done there that would make it look more environmentally friendly and fit in with climate change? Rainwater off the roof type thing. I think there's a lot of areas that we can definitely explore and move things forward and show true leadership at the county level. So thank you, everyone. If there's nothing else, we will move on with the agenda then.
We just need to vote on the resolution, Chair.
Thank you. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, so there is no other business that I'm aware of.
No, none of this time. And I think the next steps will be just that. Obviously, the climate change staff person will be starting the end of this month. And obviously we'll be working with that person to move forward with the public consultation and then finalizing that plan and then starting to implement it. So I think the next steps will be with the task force is once we're into that consultation piece, maybe reporting back to the task force in terms of what we're hearing, and then coming back, of course, with a final draft version based on some of that feedback and input from the community. So those are the next steps that we see them at this stage, and we appreciate the task force support and guidance to get us to this point, and look forward to future discussions for sure.
Excellent, thank you. Deputy Warden McQueen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And just a quick question, and maybe I missed it somewhere. How many of the lower tier municipalities actually have something in the works? You mentioned yourself, Madam Chair, Georgian Bluffs. I know Grey Highlands. We have a report coming to us at this council meeting. Are the smaller or the lower tier municipalities, are they engaged in this? Is there any comment back on that? Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Chair Carlton. We actually shared an early draft of the climate change action plan with local municipal CAOs and local municipal staff, just to get their early feedback and thoughts, because like you said, local municipalities are key partners in moving forward with this action plan. So all the comments we've received back to date have been very positive in terms of seeing alignment with where some local municipalities are already going. And as Deputy Warden McQueen indicated, there's some municipalities that are moving forward with some initiatives, and we really want to see alignment between the county's action plan and what some of our local municipalities are working on. And we see that climate change staff person is that role to help tie everything together, and working with both the county and local municipalities to move forward in a coordinated fashion. So I think that's what's going to be key for that person's role, is to do that. And we're super excited to have that person start to be able to move that forward for sure.
So just to follow up with that, other than circulating it to our lower tiers, should we make a motion at county council or maybe this committee that we would rightfully respect comments back, not just receive, but force them to make some comments, like something. We want your feedback, we want your input, right? Like, even if it takes a committee of a whole meeting of their own to go through it. I think it's so important, as you said, to have that input, Randy. I think can we move something in a motion, and through you, Madam Chair, or through staff, the best vehicle, but maybe that has to come back to the county council. But I'm just thinking it's so important that they are engaged, because it's about. I know we have our mayor and deputy mayors that come back from that, but sometimes if you word it in a way that you're looking for input from staff and the other councillors that don't sit on county council, then they feel like, well, they really are reaching out to us. You know what I mean? I just wonder if that's a possibility or just a thought.
Thank you. Kim, go ahead, please.
One of the things that we've talked about as staff is how important it is that like the technical aspect of this, which is measuring those baseline numbers and then trying to roll that up into an overall impact. It's, first of all, everybody needs to agree that they're willing to contribute and be part of this. And then we need to be able to report back to the individual municipalities about what we've achieved. And a lot of the measuring that's gone on in this is Grey County wide. So individual municipalities, I think, might have a specific or unique thing that they can address in their own community that absolutely has a positive impact on our overall targets. But as well, we're truly trying to move this forward together. So I think it's an excellent point, Paul, that we do have some maybe more formal buy-in when it comes to how we're going to measure and report back on all of this.
Just to follow up on that, certainly I think it's so important that they're engaged and because it's so important. The other thing, and I know AMO came out with a policy paper there, I don't know, over a year ago now, about the adaptation of climate change, and they talked about flooding before, and I kept saying, we got to talk about drought and because you see what's going out in BC and stuff like that. And, I think it'll come to the point, I think it's more and more we're understanding that there is climate change. I think I see it as a farmer. We see it as a country. We see it as the world. So I think more and more but it's the adaptation. Okay. If things are changing, this is going to be getting off a little bit topic here, but it's the adaptation of, and they're talking about that with that town that was burnt to the ground in BC. What could they have done? What could they have changed and all that kind of stuff? And that's something I think we also have to look out next 10 to 20 years is the adaptation of how we adapt to that. Just some thoughts.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, I'm kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, Deputy Warden. Do we need to make a motion bringing this forward for all municipalities, or is that something should happen when it comes to County Council? Heather, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think in the resolution that was just passed by the committee that staff are being directed to solicit feedback from the public and municipalities. So I think staff in their letter to our member municipalities can request that formal discussion at council and have those comments sent back to the appropriate staff for inclusion then in the final draft plan.
Okay, thank you. And then that brings me to maybe another question. Are all municipalities engaged with their own climate action plan in some respect, that they would have kind of a method of commenting, of putting it forward at each local municipality? Is there a way to ensure that everybody does comment, I guess is my real question.
Yeah, and I think through you, Chair Carlton, I think part of the next steps in the consultation will be just that, as Heather indicated, is connecting with back with our local municipalities, and if it's having a local municipal workshop, having offering to present at local municipal councils, things like that. Like that's where we see the next kind of steps going in terms of getting that engagement, getting that feedback from each of the local municipalities as part of that, as well as connecting with those community groups that Scott mentioned earlier. They're key in terms of working with they're doing some great stuff already on the ground, so we want to partner with them and look for opportunities to connect with them and make sure there's alignment with what they're hoping to achieve and what we're all collectively hoping to achieve. And so that's part of the next steps on the consultation piece is exactly that, is connecting with each of those groups, connecting with the local municipalities through workshops and other things. May have to be virtually initially, but who knows? Like I said, we may be able to do some in person towards later this summer and fall. So we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of the next steps. Is exactly that. We've got a draft now. We want to hear comments from everyone, and we'll try and connect with as many folks and local municipalities as we can, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions before we move on to, we'll take it next meeting date is to be determined based on feedback received?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I wonder if I might pose a question to Scott. Scott, can you please remind us of what the timeline is for that collaborative electric infrastructure proposal, for the funding? What's the timeline on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, our understanding is the application has now been submitted to FCM. They're going through the application. They have a bit of a coaching process whereby they'll give you feedback on further refining your application. We hope that we'll hear back one way or the other, either later in August or early September, based on the latest meeting we had. And then if we were successful in getting the funding, the study would be sort of fall through first quarter of 2022. So we can certainly keep the task force up to date on that. But based on the latest meeting we had last week, we're thinking we're not going to hear until probably late summer or very early fall on whether or not we were successful.
Thank you.
And through you, Chair Carlson, and if we are not successful, and we hope that we are, because we see this as being a key project with a number of municipalities and partnerships, we think it aligns perfectly with what FCM is trying to achieve. But if we're not, then I think that's where we'll have a discussion again with the task force and seeing if we want to continue to move that forward. As I think the task force had mentioned previously, I think we see great value and merit in moving forward with this study, regardless of the SCM funding or not. But we're keeping our fingers crossed, and we hope we will get that funding for sure.
Thank you, Randy and Scott. And that just poses a question for me. Is part of what that task force is looking at, or that network, is the infrastructure available if everybody, I'm thinking of the side road next to me where there are probably 40 houses down that side road. If everyone had an electric vehicle, is the hydro infrastructure there to support every one of them plugging in their car that night? Is that one of the things being addressed?
I believe through this study, they would be looking more at the public infrastructure in terms of, so if you're driving up from Kitchener-Waterloo, where can you get a charge kind of thing, and looking at, whether it be privately operated, what we used to call gas stations, but charging stations, or whether we look at stations at public buildings. I can reconfirm that, but I don't believe they're specifically getting into whether or not the grid capacity is there for private homes across the study area.
Thank you. Kim, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Electric vehicles can be charged at power draws comparable to various household appliances. Most EVs charging at home on a 240 volt, like your dryer, level 2 charger will draw about 7,200 watts or less, whereas an electric furnace is about 10,000. So, it's not nothing, but it is something that it's within the capacity of existing home power.
Okay, that is actually good to know, because that's been posed to me and that I've read different places. Excellent. Any other comments then? I don't like to shut it down too quick because it's an interesting topic, and I think there's a lot that we can do going forward with this. So thank you, everyone. Next meeting date to be determined. I'll call for adjournment, please. Councillor Hutchison. Do we need Councillor Gamble for seconder? All in favor? Excellent. Thank you. That's carried. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day. Enjoy that sunshine out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Have a good one.
Everyone.
Bye.